Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. This is our weekly Country Roads with Winston Shrout. It is Friday, May 25th, 2018. And let's welcome Winston. How are you today, Winston?
Well, doing pretty good. Feeling all right. Got a good night's sleep. Ready to roll forward.
Well, very good. It's going to be an interesting weekend. And as I published in my last video, I'm going to put my Q Patriot glasses on because it's Memorial Day weekend. And I wanted to wish all of our servicemen and all of the patriots in our country, in the United States, a happy Memorial Day, and to remember all those who have fallen before us, fighting for our country, for liberty, and because the fight is never more important than it is right now. So I have my Q Patriot glasses on. See, you got the blue, the red and white stars. And there's a lot going on with Q. I might do a separate post on that this weekend. Monday, we will be off. We will be back on Tuesday with our POTUS report with the Feds. So you can stay tuned for that. Today, we're going to talk about the ultimate conspiracy that Winston has prepared for us. And I'm going to let Winston begin. Thanks.
Well, okay. Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. I got this one little thing here I might share. The people might, if it'll work. I think it will. It's kind of just humorous. So let me try this. Can you see that?
Fighter pilot old commercial. Okay, yeah, it's playing. I can't hear any sound. There's no sound, Winston, but we can see the movie. Gee. Oh, gee. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, man. Oh, that's pretty funny. Is that your tribute to Memorial Day?
I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of just like a cute little commercial there.
Yeah, it is
But maybe when we get a little bit further into our discussion today, I might play it again because that has many elements
cute.
of mind control in it for advertising.
Yeah.
You see all the drama, death staring people in the face and the beautiful woman, and all these guys and all this kind of stuff. And then you have the big relief.
Yeah.
It does something stupid and falls over the side of the ship, and then she goes rushing out there, and he got lucky. Anyway, it's kind of a cute commercial, but it many elements as far as the advertising and the technique for mind control. So maybe if we get to it a little bit later, we might just play it again so
Okay.
that people can look at that as far as seeing some of the elements that would influence people to smoke Lucky Strikes. Anyway, it's kind of cute. Why don't we just kind of start out with a little bit of a chuckle before we get started here, because we're going to talk about some pretty ignorant stuff, to be perfectly honest. Well, I wanted to kind of title this one The Ultimate Conspiracy, because that's what we're going to go into. And in particular, we're going to review a book by Dr. John Coleman. It's called The Committee of 300. Now, a lot of people may never have heard of this, but I think you're going to be a little bit shocked, perhaps. For those who haven't seen that book, you might just be a little bit shocked at how deep this thing goes. Now, my own experience with this book is back when, I first got personal computer, and so I was, surfing through the internet looking for, different things that I thought might interest me. I came upon this book. So I thought this looks interesting. So I thought I'd download a copy of it so I could, go back and review it, stuff like that. And so now this is, I think, either 1999 or maybe 2000, probably 99. And this is so long ago, I was on a dial-up. Where you plug your computer into the phone lines to get onto the internet.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was on this dial-up. You can imagine how slow it was. So you're sitting there, twiddling your thumbs, and this thing downloads. And so it downloaded, and then I saw, oh crap, man, there's some kind of crazy thing going on. Some kind of, my computer was fluttering and going on, and so I thought, oh crap, somebody sent in a virus right behind that. So I yanked the phone line out real quick, to stop it, because I didn't know what was coming in. So apparently, at least in those days, back in those earliest of times, they were kind of concerned about people getting that information. And so today you can go right on the internet and download it. It's, in 2018, it's not a problem. As a matter of fact, the fellow that wrote the book, there's a couple of videos on YouTube that you can watch, where he talks about these things. But anyway, that was my start with this concept, this book. But then the concept of the Committee of 300 is not well known. And I have had experiences with it. Talking to some of my friends internationally, it's well known. I mean, talking to, a fellow who had been involved in international banking, another fellow, talk to them about it, and they just say, oh yeah, yeah, we know all about that. So it's fairly well known and accepted, not much liked, but very well known in certain circles. Let me put it that way. And then I don't know, it's probably around maybe 2007, 2008. I was called. A fellow wanted to basically rent my time for a couple hours. And so I went to the place where he lived, the house where he lived at. As it turned out, he was a CPA, well educated in the subject, of accounting and all those kinds of things. And so we went over, various aspects of different things he was dealing with, personally and with clients and stuff like that. Looking for some of the, commercial redemption type technology, like acceptor for value and some of those things that he wanted to know about. And so I think we spent a couple hours together. And then I don't know, sometime after that, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month, he called me back up. And he wanted to meet again. And this time he wanted to meet in a restaurant. And I said, well, that's okay. Hey, we can talk over, some kind of meal or something. Well, anyway, the subject matter at this point was a whole lot different. And what he revealed to me was that actually, as a CPA, he had done considerable accounting work for the Committee of 300. And he was working directly with what he called the Council of Five, who he said were the five, I don't know, head guys, if you want to call them that. And they were interested, having, viewed, some of my information and so forth. They were interested in a particular thing, which they were trying to promote and push. And that got me a little bit concerned, because this was obviously a recruiting meeting.
Oh.
They were trying to recruit me. And luckily I knew enough, having read Dr. Coleman's book and some of these other things, luckily I knew enough to avoid that. I did not want to have anything to do with that, with those people. So I shut that off, no more of this, because I simply would not become involved in something like that. So you see these kind of things happening, and then I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, another one of my friends said, "Hey, I want you to talk to so and so over here. He's got this, he's got that, going on," and kind of trying to promote him and build him up. And I didn't want to talk to the guy. I mean, I'd already heard enough about him. I didn't want to talk to him. Anyway, he just kind of tricked me into talking to him, So anyway, talking to this guy, and so he was trying to establish his credibility by saying that he was a member of the Committee of 300.
Oops.
Yeah, and so I said, "Oh, really?" I said, so you're familiar then with the Committee of Five? Oh, he says can't talk about a lot of stuff on the telephone. First off, he was a BSer. And I think he was a name dropper, and because he was trying to use, like I would be impressed, because he may have been on the Committee of 300 for all I know. He was Egyptian, but I'm not impressed about that stuff, to be perfectly honest. Not impressed at all. So you can name drop all you want to. It's not going to impress me altogether that much. But anyway, that's been kind of my personal experience with this subject of the Committee of 300. So I like to review the book that Dr. Coleman had written. Now, this is old information. I mean, it goes, I think he wrote the book in the early 90s. So, this information has been available for a long, long time. I haven't seen it, being referred to very many times. Now, some of the things that Benjamin Fulford talks about the, Masonic P2 Lodge and all that kind of stuff, Coleman's talking about all those things in this book. And then about the black nobility and the Pentar and all that junk,
Right.
If you follow that information, this book is, right specific on some of those points.
Okay.
So what I like to do is kind of the same thing we've done with some of the other books, that we've reviewed, is I'll put it up, and then there's a few pages that have some points, that might be of interest, for further study. Of course, I'll send you the book, and you can post it. But it's all over the internet. I mean, at this point in history, it's all over the internet.
Sure.
Like I say, when I first downloaded it on dial-up, it just
Must have waited a long time.
Yeah, I must have waited a long
Those were the
time, I
days.
guess.
Those were the days.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Dial-up modems. I remember that.
Yeah. Anyway, well, one of the things that we won't refer to particularly in the book, that there's a technique that I'll refer to as it refers to psychological principles, and that's something that they came out of Tavistock, and that's something they call long-range penetration, or it's what I think another word for it would be long-range stress syndrome. And this goes right along with Stockholm syndrome. And what they found, that if people generally were presented with a problem to which there seemed to be no solution, or a solution that was insurmountable, that they would simply give up on it. They wouldn't do anything about it. They just say, okay, ho hum, can't do anything about that, so why worry about it? And so, and people would become complacent about everything else. And so the first issue they talked about, one of the first things that they used this technique with was the Cold War. The Cold War was that element that they believed, that was so, so unsolvable that people become complacent to it. And then, after the thing with the wall coming down and all these kind of things, then the Cold War became a non-issue, so they had to think of something else some other huge monumental problem that couldn't be solved to keep people in that same frame of mind. And the two new elements they came up with was UFOs and global warming. So now we have two more problems that are insurmountable that tend to make people complacent and not want to solve any problem. So those are techniques. Those are psychological techniques that are in effect and they're being used. And again, like I say, it's stressed in this book. So let's take a look at that. Did that come up okay?
Yep. Conspirators, hierarchy, story of the committee.
Yeah, conspiracy hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300. Dr. John Coleman. And it shows 169 pages in this book. It's chock full of information. I mean, when I was first starting to study conspiracies and all that kind of thing, this was a good fundamental book because it went right straight to the core of the problem. And many of these other conspiracies have sprung right straight from this. And it has a lot of history in it too. We'll look at some of that here in a minute. But first off, he creates a historical basis for it, going back centuries. And like I say, speaking to some of my contacts, international contacts and stuff, to them it's ho hum. Yeah, we know all about that. But here in the United States, I don't see it talked about. So, whatever's going on here, we might need to take a closer look at.
Well, because Americans are footing the bill for all of this. That's why they don't want us to know.
Good part of it.
Yep.
Anyway, he has a foreword here that you might want to read through a little bit. Apparently, he had been a professional spy, intelligence officer. I had many occasions to access highly classified documents, but during service as a political science officer in the field of Angola, West Africa, I had the opportunity to view a series of top secret classified documents, which were unusually explicit. And what I saw filled me with anger and resentment and launched me on a course from which I have not deviated, namely to uncover what power it is that controls and manages the British and United States government. I was thoroughly familiar with all of the well-known secret societies, such as the Royal Institute, International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderbergers, Trilaterals, blah, 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 and all the spin-offs from these secret societies. As an intelligence officer, and even before that as a young student, blah, 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 he said he had cut his eye teeth on these, big things. But when he came back to the United States in '69, he started to look at some of these other things in the background that were typically not looked at, such as the Order of Saint John of Jerusalem. Now that is the Knights of Malta, Club of Rome, German Marshall Fund, Venetian Black Nobility, so forth and so forth. Okay, so he cut his teeth on some of the more prominent elements. And then he started to investigate some of the things in the background. That's what it kind of goes on here. Anyway, you want to read the forward to it, where he talks about what had motivated him.
Can we just clarify this
Yeah.
euphemism you use, this cutting their teeth on it, for folks that aren't used to Appalachian American lingo?
Well, when you're a baby and you start to sprout teeth,
okay,
you chew on something.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not mom's nipple. Mom puts a stop to that real quick.
Yeah.
So you get a pacifier, or you get a whatever to cut your teeth on. So when we say cutting your teeth on something, what it means
Okay.
is your first experience with chewing,
Chewing.
actually.
So, okay. Just so our viewers understand that some might not be familiar with Appalachian American
Well,
language.
I think that's pretty much a common term.
Actually, it is kind of common.
Maybe not in New Jersey, but
Well, it's
anyway.
just if you use it in a different context, you're not sure how someone means it.
Oh,
So that's what I
okay.
mean. I mean, if I had a baby in front of me and said cutting teeth, I'd know exactly what they meant. But
Oh yeah.
I think when you're looking at, like, I knew what you meant, but I knew that many people in this context might not. So that's all.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. So cutting your teeth means your first exposure to conspiracy
There you
in
go.
this context.
Okay. Very well.
And so what Coleman's talking about as an intelligence officer, he was exposed to certain things that he cut his teeth on, which was his first exposure to some of these elements. And then later on, as he investigated further and dug deeper into it, other things popped up. And so he's kind of given a run up on wanting to uh, talk about the Committee of 300, which he considers to be technically the basis for all of these others in that respect. Anyway, you can read some of these
Okay.
preemptive things here. I wanted
I
to go
just
in,
I
huh?
just saw it said something about the World Court in The
Oh
Hague.
yeah,
So how is that related to the
was
Committee
that
300?
something I just passed by?
Yeah, you just passed by it, and uh, it was at the bottom of the sentence, I think. Yeah, right there, right there. Second paragraph to
Yeah.
the end.
His contention is these international organizations are all a part of the Committee of 300.
Okay, sure.
And
The
he
world
talks about
structure.
the Club of Rome and some of those things with this Palmy feller, uh, and he was shuttling back and forth, in between the World Court at The Hague. And so when Coleman talks about some of these international organizations, such as the IMF, Bank of International Settlements, World Court, he attributes all those to be under the control of the Committee of 300.
So what you're saying here is that the elected politicians are basically the puppets, and who really controls things are running these organizations behind the scenes that we don't
Yes.
hear necessarily of their names because
Well,
they
you do
have
hear some of the names. Henry
some of them.
Kissinger.
Yeah, he was one.
Oh yeah, Kissinger, a very very powerful man,
Hmm.
and he's seen him popping up every place, sticking his nose into everything. Advising presidents. He's not advising; he's just telling them what to do.
Right. Okay, just so we're putting it into context for viewers who might not be familiar with it,
Uh-huh.
that there's a structure, in other words, a shadow government, not just behind the United States, but behind all countries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go down to the first little item. You can read all these things here. First item I want to talk to would be here on page 12.
But it's a shadow government that's behind all countries, which means they're all united behind the scenes. And so
Yeah.
the war and the war and the problems are only there to make them money. They're so they
That'd be
so what you're
correct.
saying is that they create the war, they profit off of the companies that manufacture the items for the war. They profit from the healthcare system that wounds and tries to take care of the
Profit from everything.
every single thing about the war, and this is where they make a huge amount of money from. So don't on that very high levels of organization, they're all united, they're all the same people. In fact, they're all the
Oh
same
yeah.
group,
Uh-huh.
and they're some of them are probably most of them are contained in this document you're sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to put into context for people.
Yeah. Now, at some point here, we're going to talk about the Aquarian conspiracy. You remember that document you put up
Yes.
when we referred to it?
Yes.
That document was a part of what's called the Aquarian conspiracy. which
Yeah.
again is a product of the Committee of 300.
Yeah.
And then I want to just refer real quick here to this concept of New World Order. This term was introduced by George Bush,
Right.
and that didn't last that long because technically what Bush was trying to do was a breakaway from the one world government, the big Committee of 300 thing. And so when Bush tried to make his split and come out with something he called the New World Order, the old one world government said, "Oh no, you're not." So that New World Order concept by Bush, which actually short-lived, and they simply wasn't going to put up with it, And so they got him back in line. They got all his personnel stuff back in line. Then it says here, talking about this, it says, this is Coleman now speaking, it says, that is why I said earlier that the term one world government is or ought to be preferred. Then this Aurelio, what his name is, once confided in his close friend Alexander Haig. Remember General Haig?
Right. Alexander.
He tried that big takeover. Anyway, Haig, that he felt like Adam Weishaupt reincarnated. And so anyway, you see all these elements. You see names popping up all through this that would give you the idea that some of these people, even though they have a public position, a public face, like General Haig and what's his name, Kissinger, and all these people, Rockefellers, and all these people. In the background, they're much more dangerous. So let's go. I wanted to go into some of the goals that these people have in mind.
Okay.
You should start right here. Okay. That's one of the goals of the secret elite group, the inheritors of Illuminism, cult of die. Anyway, talks about all these different concepts here. So what is their goal? That's what he's talking about. This elite group that also calls itself the Olympians. I think some of us perhaps have heard that term. He says because they truly believe they're equal in power and stature to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer, their god, set themselves above our true God. And they absolutely believe they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. So here are some of the goals and elements that these people are working toward. Number one is one world government, which would have a unified church and monetary system under their direction. Not many people are aware that the one world government is being set up its own church in the 20s and 30s, for they realized the need for a religious belief inherent in mankind to have an outlet, and therefore set up a church body to channel that belief in the direction that they desired. You know what that is?
Yeah.
World Council of Churches. Yeah. Anyway, second element here, they wanted the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride.
It's not going to happen.
The United States is a melting pot.
I know it's not going to happen here. It is not going to.
It already has happened.
I know, but
well, what was the purpose of the European Union? To take down all the borders.
Right, with the influx of the.
Look what happened when they did that.
They weren't. They were mercenaries. They weren't all, refugees. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Number 3, it says the destruction of religion, and more especially the Christian religion, with the one exception of their own creation mentioned above, the World Council of Churches. It talks about the control of each and every person through means of mind control, and what Brzezinski called technotronics, which would create human-like robots and a system of terror besides what Felix Red Terror. Anyway, but if we have time, we'll get into a little bit of this technotronics. It's real. They can put
Oh, it's
thoughts
very.
into your mind. You
Mm-hmm.
can hear voices in your head telling you to do things.
Wow.
Then the end to all industrialization and the production of nuclear generated electric power, what they call post-industrial zero growth society. Exempted from that was the computer and service industries. United States industries that remain will be exported to countries such as Mexico, where abundant slave labor is available. Unemployables in the wake of industrial destruction will either become opium, heroin, or cocaine addicts, or become statistics in the elimination process that we know today is the Global 2000.
Okay.
This book was written, a long time ago, and so he's talking about things that we've already gone past.
Right.
As far as the Global 2000 thing they were trying to do, mass extermination of people didn't occur at that time. They're still trying for it, but it's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah, another element, the legalization of drugs and pornography.
Mm-hmm. That's what they're trying to do now.
Uh-huh. Uh, oops. Depop. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You're back.
Yeah, all right. Depopulation of large cities, according to the trial run carried out by Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. Pol Pot was an experiment. And he was promoted by these very same people. They wanted to see what would happen in the country when you had this absolute terror going through it. And they found out. Let's see. Suppression of all scientific development except for those deemed beneficial by the committee,
Suppression of all scientific
such
development,
as free energy.
such as cures for the cancers and the diseases that they created and have patents for.
Yeah.
AIDS, Ebola, West Nile, avian flu, things like that.
Oh, yeah. Uh, let's see. Another thing they wanted was caused by means of limited war in the advanced countries and by means of starvation and disease in third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2000. Well, it didn't work.
People they call useless eaters.
Yeah, they get into that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so cause limited wars by advanced countries such as the United States getting involved in all these wars across the planet,
Right.
and then by means of starvation and disease in third world countries. We see this. I mean, pretty obvious that a lot of their plans and so forth have actually, gotten a lot of it into effect. Certainly not to the extent that they had hoped, obviously, because we got past the year 2000. Here we are 18 years later.
Hmm.
And now we're starting to see a reversal and we're going back the other way. Another goal was to weaken the moral fiber of the nation and to demoralize workers in the labor class by creating mass unemployment. Uh-huh. As jobs dwindled due to the post-industrial zero growth policies introduced by the Club of Rome, demoralized and discouraged workers will resort to alcohol and drugs. See, this is a problem we had down on the reservation. It's one of the things we want to change, when we start to do these humanitarian projects.
Right.
Is it because many of the fathers and men and so forth on the reservation have become completely demoralized because they can't find gainful employment. So then the government gives them a handout and then they go and spend it on alcohol. So that's one of the major things that we have to reverse to restabilize, the communities, for community pride, restabilizing, reuniting the families and everything. This is one of the important processes that we hope to achieve, is to undo this concept here. Oh, then another goal is to keep people everywhere from deciding their own destiny by means of one created crisis after another and then managing such crises. Well, that's a perfect example of it.
Hmm.
At least 80% of college graduates never work in the field that they studied. 80%.
Well, you
I
know,
didn't.
yeah, but you know what? When you learn psychology, you take that with you everywhere you go.
Oh, kind of.
But it's not that you're working, in psychology per se, but
Well, I mean, I very well could have, gone out and become a chicken farmer and
because you're really good at programming chickens to dance.
pretty good at programming them chickens.
That's pretty funny.
But to
True.
keep with this point right here, about deciding their own destiny. For instance, a young person will go to college, they'll have dreams of the future. They would like to work in this field, they like to work in that, some other field, stuff like that. But fully 80% of them never do. They can't. There's nothing there for them. You see what I mean? So it kind of goes along with what the point they're making here.
Well, and
Let's see.
also, I mean, the Common Core has dumbed down the, populace, the young working populace at this point. So they can't really get more than menial labor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Or the jobs are just, I mean, you saw what they were saying about Amazon. The some employees were actually, urinating in bottles on the job because they couldn't take a break. They couldn't lose the time on the line that they were working on or whatever they were doing. They were too afraid of being
Losing their
criticized
job,
for.
yeah.
It's in today's day and age, people, wake up. This is Amazon. This is what President Trump does not like about Amazon, and he's trying to change it.
Yeah, slave labor.
It's slave labor. Yep.
Then another one of the goals was to introduce new cults and continue to boost those already functioning, which includes rock music gangsters. They're even using the word gangsters in today's world. Gangsta, gangsta music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, introduced now back in this day. I mean, this is way back when he's writing his book. So music gangsters such as Filthy Degenerate, Mick Jagger's Rolling Stones,
Jeez.
and the Tavistock created rock group, which began with the Beatles.
How do you like that?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, the Beatles came out of Tavistock. As a matter of fact, later on, I think he indicates who had actually written the words and the music that the Beatles performed. Everybody said, well, they're writing all this music and doing all this. Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Beatles,
Not for a long time.
what do you call it? The British invasion, or whatever they called it back in the day.
Right.
You recall? Well, you're not old enough.
Nope.
I remember. Then to continue to build up the cult of Christian fundamentalism begun by the British East India Company servant Darby, which will be misused to strengthen the Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of God's chosen people, and by donating very substantial amounts of money to what they mistakenly believe is a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity. We talked about this last time. Yeah. To press for the spread of religious cults such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim fundamentalists, Sikhs, and to carry out experiments of the Jim Jones and Son of Sam type murders.
Yeah, the Jim Jones thing was a complete MK Ultra. Yeah,
yeah,
it was a psyop. It was a mind control. It was, yeah.
Yeah,
I have that from other
I think
sources.
Dan commented on that. He said they didn't drink Kool-Aid. He said they were shot to death.
Right. Yep.
The people didn't voluntarily drink poison. They just shot them to death and then posed them like that.
Yeah. Right.
Then it says it's worth noting that the late Ayatollah Khomeini was a creation of British intelligent military intelligence, Division 6, commonly known as MI6. MI6 pops up all the time.
Right, now that's the British, that's the international division of their British intelligence. MI5 would be their domestic within
Yeah, that's what
the
they
U.
say.
That's what they say, right?
Like I say, they all sleep in the same bed, just passing syphilis back and forth. That's all they do. That's what they do. Uh, Another thing they wanted to work at was to export religious liberation ideas around the world, so as to undermine all existing religions, but more especially Christian religion. Now, why do you think that they would target Christian religion in particular? It's not because of Jesus.
Mm,
It's because our international commercial model
mm,
is based on Christianity. And so they have to attack Christianity if they want to control or change the international commercial model, such as capitalism. Remember a couple of times ago, we had talked about some of that information Ayn Rand was talking about. So they had to
right.
destroy Christianity, not because of Jesus.
Mm,
I mean, the Committee of 300 could care less for Jesus, but they are concerned about the structure. See? And then caused a total collapse of world economics, engendered total political chaos, take control of all foreign and domestic policies of the United States, give support to supranational institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, and the World Court, as far as possible, make local institutions of lesser effect by gradually phasing them out or bringing them under the mantle of the United Nations. What's that Agenda 22 stuff all about?
Agenda 21 and Agenda
21.
2030. Yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
updated version. Yep. Oops.
Penetrate and subvert all governments.
Mhm.
Organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus and negotiate with terrorists whenever terrorist activities take place. Mm-hmm.
They create the terrorists and then they which is what
Yeah,
they're doing with
create the
ISIS.
problem, then bring the solution.
Right, which is what they're doing with ISIS and what they were doing with the Taliban and things like that. They
Yeah,
create, yeah.
and then take control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it.
Checkmate.
Checkmate.
Checkmate. Check.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are some of the goals in specific, that they talk about. Now, I want to identify some of the institutions that they use to accomplish this.
Mm.
So let's kind of just go down here. All right.
For folks, just a little reflecting on some of this, it's you can Google these things and
Oh
look it up
yeah.
yourself. It's hard to know really what's reliable, what isn't reliable, but you really have to. We're in a process. This is the Great Awakening, and this is what Q refers to all the time. POTUS refers to this all the time, and that's why we're covering all of this. We're documenting this awakening. People are wakening up.
Yeah.
People, almost anywhere I go now, you really hear people in different places and different walks of life, just slowly, little by little. Some are more red-pilled than others, but little
Yeah.
by little, people are starting to wake up to this. I
Uh-huh.
wish it was a little bit more, but that's what we're here for. So we're trying to help.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to do. Like I say, to many of our listeners, some of this stuff, they know quite a bit about. I'm just trying to add to maybe their library.
Exactly.
You know, because like I say, Coleman's book here, this is deep, deep stuff. I mean, this goes right to the core of the problem. Anyway, here he starts to list a lot of the institutions which are controlled by a Committee of 300 and the influence and the impact and stuff. Certainly, the Royal Institute for International Affairs
Mhm.
seems to be at the bottom of a lot of this, and then Tavistock
Mhm.
has a lot to do with some of the. Like I said, he said, Tavistock created Mick Jagger and the Beatles. That goes into a little bit of a history of the different ones, and I wanted to go to in particular. He talks about FEMA and all that. I wanted to go to, let's see, one of the things that we've talked about in the past.
Mhm.
You brought it up.
Could you just explain a little bit about Tavistock to our viewers so they
It's a
understand what
think
we're referring
tank. It's psychologists that sit around and figure out the ways to implement through behaviorism the goals that was mentioned. As the goals of the Committee of 300.
to?
So
And there's
Tavistock is a think tank.
it's an
Uh,
old one too,
oh
and
yeah,
it's
oh
an old
yeah.
one exactly. And there's like Tavistock Institute for Human Relations.
Mhm.
Folks, you need to be looking into what they're doing and who's advising them and what they're, there's other think tanks,
Oh
there's
yeah.
Council on Foreign Relations, folks. These people are the ones guiding and directing all of the policy, all of
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
laws that are being passed. And the problem is people started to sleep at the wheel, and I don't blame them, but because the corruption was so rampant that people got sick of politics. But when you walk out of it, not only are they're not just doing things like, taking bribes, they're doing far, far worse. And
Oh yeah.
if you're not holding them accountable and watching them, and I have to tell you, we all have to do it. It isn't going to happen by saying, oh, someone else is going to take care of it for us. No, it isn't. We're only powers in numbers. And if we're not united on this, they will continue to advance their agenda. So we have to all take the responsibility. I don't care if you want to be red pilled or not, you're going to be, because we all have to be part of it. We all have to accept this responsibility for what's happened. Not that we're responsible, but at this point, the information's out there, and when someone's
Don't
trying
condone it and don't continue it.
yeah, when someone's trying to red pill you or you're trying to red pill somebody else, you tell them you better wake up because your world's going to change drastically if you don't. And you're going to be sitting there wondering how the hell did it happen? So you
Mhm.
better, people are going to have to, whether they want to swallow that, choke it down, get it down, red pill them however you can. Because, and I, red pill, from the Matrix, the movie. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Stanford Research Center. So here's more.
Oh yeah.
Rand Corporation. We don't know what they're really doing back there, but
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah, we know what they're doing.
yeah.
Anyway, this Stanford research, I think we've referred to, or you've referred to it several times about some of the experiments. For instance, one of the experiments they did was a prison
Mhm. Yeah.
scenario. So they took college students and made some of them guards and make some of them prisoners, and then they started to create situations, and they found that even though the young people went into it knowing it was an experiment,
Yeah.
they started doing atrocious things to one another.
Yes. And they were really nice people. And it was funny
Yeah,
because when they debriefed them after the study, I know this study really well. After they debriefed them, the guy so it was a prison simulation. So some were just randomly assigned to be the guards, some were randomly assigned to be prisoners. And within a very short period of time, after 2 weeks, they had to stop the study because of the amount of psychological
yeah,
uh, turmoil these people were actually going through. And the people who were debriefed afterwards said, like, if they were the prisoner, they said, it's really funny because it's weird because I really know this guy who he's referring to as one of the ones who was assigned to be the warden or the guard. And he says,
yeah,
I know he's a really nice guy. I
yeah,
really know who he is, but I can't understand what happened in there. And what the study was about was they just randomly assigned roles to people.
yeah,
And when they did that, they automatically took on this authoritative and this victim. So if you were assigned the role of the prisoner, you took on a role of a victim. When you
yeah.
took on the role of the prison guard, you were like an abuser. This
Yeah,
wasn't just a third. It was beyond
unbelievable.
it was beyond authoritarian, and it really went to show the most important thing that I learned in psychology, because that's what my degree is in, is the power of the social situation, and that's really what determined how people behave.
Yeah.
Social psychology. This is what I'm talking about. Very
Oh yeah.
important.
Uh-huh.
This is what it's about.
Yeah, people might want to go and do a little bit of research on that, on some of those experiments. You'll be shocked.
Yeah.
Well, let's go down. Let's see.
That was Zimbardo. That was Dr. Zimbardo. That was his, I think that was one of his studies. That
Uh-huh.
was, yeah.
I wanted to talk about this Aquarian conspiracy.
The problem was we weren't they weren't studying this to simply learn. They were studying it to use against us. And that's what a lot of these researchers at these universities don't realize.
Yeah,
That
they're
they,
getting government money, so getting government grants, they'll go do anything, any damn thing the government tells them to.
yeah. And
Anything for a paycheck.
I almost ended up in a lab, but it was a good lab. Not all of them, but a lot of them are like this, and they are just the gatekeepers for this agenda. So these universities who are research universities, some are doing some research that ultimately will be used in a nefarious way, won't be used positive for humanity.
Exactly.
Right. Now, whether these researchers know this going into this, I don't know. Some may not.
Well, they know it after it's over with.
Maybe eventually they'll find that out.
I mean, I can't imagine, participating in those things as a controller, as a professor, or whatever, because they're not stupid.
Yeah.
They're not stupid, and so they're doing these tests and all these kind of things to see what people will do,
Right.
and then they're passing the results on to the up the line. It
Yeah.
ends up, with Tavistock or wherever. And
Mm-hmm.
now they know how to control people.
Yeah, I mean, some of these were, I think some of that also was like one of the earlier comments that you made was this learned helplessness idea.
Yep.
When they were, they'd put a dog on a sheet that would zap him with some electricity, and then the dog would jump off of it, and he'd jump onto another sheet, another like metallized flooring,
Yeah.
metallized tray. And then they'd zap him on there, and then he'd jump back to the other one. And eventually the dog learned it didn't matter what he did, and he stopped trying to escape it, and he would just sit there and get shocked. And it's so
Yeah.
sad. It's
Uh-huh.
sad how they've done this research on animals and on humans alike, but they did it
Exactly.
to control us, folks. It's
To learn how to control us, and then they implement it.
right. Now let's conduct some research on how to extinguish oligarchs, how to extinguish, the New World Order. And I think that,
Just say no, I won't
how do
participate.
you take down a dictator? Let's do some research on how to take down dictators. And, well, let's see, they work for Lucifer. If that's their god, then,
It's called 45 caliber
Yeah.
Colt. Anyway, getting on here with some of the things,
Or
again,
38 special.
those who do know about, astrology and everything about the precession of the planet and all those kind of things, they understand that we are in the age of Aquarius. But anyway, this other, false concept was called the Age of Aquarius group. So what they say, the coming of the Age of Aquarius. You remember, you're not old enough, but
Yeah, I
there's
do. Yeah.
well, you remember Mama and Papa's,
Yeah. I mean,
Mama Cass and the Age of Aquarius and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, I grew up in the 70s. Okay. Well, there you
Uh,
go.
okay. Well, I didn't know
And
you were
80s.
that old. I
And
thought you were just a young one.
80s. And 80s. I had the
Okay.
big hair too, like everybody else did.
Cool.
I'll never
Well,
forget those plaid, bell bottoms though. That's really my
oh,
mother.
I had some.
Yeah, I didn't really forgive her for the plaid bell bottoms. I didn't like them.
All right. I didn't have any platform shoes though.
Yeah, no, I didn't either. I was actually too young for that, but not for the dreaded bell bottoms. Okay.
Well, I mean, the bell bottoms were styled after Navy uniforms. Sailors wore bell bottoms on purpose because of the freedom of movement it gave them
All right.
aboard a ship. And
Well,
so, I
I'm
mean,
sure they weren't plaid.
no, they weren't plaid.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Okay. So the
Anyway,
Age of Aquarius caught America totally unprepared. So this is
uh-huh. It says we as a nation were not prepared for the changes about to be forced upon us. Whoever had heard of Tavistock and all these other things, say they were not even on the American political scene. What we would have noticed if we bothered to look at all was a falling off of our ability to withstand futuristic shock. As we became more frightened, distressed, and eventually entered a period of psychological shock followed by widespread apathy as an outward manifestation of long-range penetration warfare. Again, long-range penetration came from Tavistock. It's what I call long-range stress syndrome. where you're putting into a situation, the outcome of which seems impossible regardless of what you do. So you just give up, don't do anything. See, so they feed you a lie because there is something you can do about it. Number one, don't participate. Number two, don't allow those around you who are participating to have an effect on your life. To say, hell no, I ain't doing that. And they use peer pressure, especially among young people. Young people typically want to be a part of. And so they're willing to go along with things that they normally wouldn't, in their conscience wouldn't do, just so they can be a part of, the in crowd of the group, the cool people, all that kind of stuff. I mean, back when I was growing up and stuff, the cool guys were the ones that, took their cigarettes, and rolled them up in their t-shirts, and
Yep.
had the DAs. You remember the DAs? Hairdo. You know what a DA is?
I do. I don't know. My father used to wear those.
It's called a duck's ass.
Oh yeah.
DA was a duck ass, where
Combed
they combed
over
their
like
hair back and
that.
they had a little flip, on the back. It looked like
Oh,
a
I
duck's
see.
ass.
Oh right. Okay. That I thought it meant something else. It was like the Elvis look, I thought, but no.
Well, it went way beyond the Elvis look.
Yeah.
But you talk about James Dean kind of look.
Yeah, James Dean. That's what it was.
James Dean, he was portrayed to be a cool. He's nothing but a punk. That's all James Dean ever was.
So we're talking about. So just to be clear, are we talking the Age of Aquarius was a socially engineered psyop? Or are we really
Yeah.
talking? Okay.
Yeah. It became a pop cult. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Well, that
see.
led right into the women's lib movement, which was also a psyop. So that was to break down.
The
That was to
women's lib didn't come out of. Well, yeah, it was all part of the big program.
Yeah, because that was part of the breaking down of the family, was getting the women out of the home, having the schools be the caretaker and the women out into work, so that they could
Well,
also pay more
it was
taxes.
liberating in the effect that women, for years and years, had their boobs stuck in these. So they took the bras, took them out, and burned them.
Yeah, but the
I mean,
effect
what's up
was.
with that? I don't. I mean,
Well,
but yeah,
I think it had to do with bondage, and being held
yeah,
back,
uh-huh,
and that was just an expression, a symbol of
yeah,
the not rejecting the bondage, and the many didn't have jobs, many didn't have education to have jobs, so it was like women didn't really even know what it was like to be free. So many
yeah,
times women were pretty much still slaves, or in that
yeah,
mentality that it's like your husband controls you, or your even
yeah.
own
The
some
common law
ways.
concept.
Yeah.
Now
So
we've talked about that. Like I say, in the first instance, when the country was forming, they had a choice between English common law and Anglo-Saxon common law because of the huge German population. Most common laws could come out of the same source, and that was that women were the property of men.
yeah.
Now, what happened to change that was World War II. And
Yeah.
that was because the men were all fighting, they had to staff the industries, and so women went into the workplace.
Right.
And then when the men came back, and the women said, "Oh hell no, no, we got liberated. We're not going back to what we had." And then these institutions capitalized on that concept, and so what's called the feminist movement had its good points, but it also had its bad points, in as much as it did split apart families, different things like that.
Right.
So again, these are what you call psychology, social. What? How did you
Social
come there?
engineering. Social
Yeah,
engineering, and Aaron Russo talked about this in an interview he did, as he was
yeah,
talking about
uh-huh.
his friendship with one of the Rockefellers. Was that this agenda was the whole purpose of the women's lib movement was to get that only half the people in the household were paying taxes. So to get women in the workforce, they'll have
Yeah,
more. They'll real debt slavery, folks. I mean, this was so unfair to humanity. I think we should never really have been put in this situation on this
yeah.
planet. I don't know how we got
Well,
here.
we're breaking out of that little by little.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole thing with the global reset of currencies and all these kind of things. First thing we have to do to have major social change is get the finances in order. And then, Scott Werner talked about, what does it take to get a people to where they can ascend. And he had given some numbers, which I kind of had to take him up short on. But yeah, it will take a number of years to develop within the minds and hearts of people that change. But it's here. But the first thing we have to do is get the international finances, commerce, and banking, all these things straightened out, because it's the bank, as Coleman points out in his book here. The banks and the connection to the drug trade.
Right. Let's keep reading on that. He's talking about it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, goes a little bit further here. Then I wanted to get into, let's see, this next page here. Gang wars. Gang wars were carefully planned at Stanford, deliberately designed to shock society and cause ripples of disturbances. By 1958, there were in excess of 200 of these gangs. They were made popular by a musical and a Hollywood movie, West Side Story. Gangs became popular through Hollywood, West Side Story. We take a lot of these things for granted. We say, oh yeah, West Side Story, and they were dancing and singing. But it was the introduction of the popularity of gangs. Mm-hmm. And after making the news for a decade, suddenly in 1966, they disappeared off the streets of New York. So it was all orchestrated. It was all orchestrated. Anyway, through the near decade of gang violence, the public reacted according to the profile response that Stanford expected. Socially as a whole, society as a whole could not comprehend gang warfare, and the public responded in a maladaptive manner. Like I say, all gangs were socially engineered.
Yep.
And then they had, some of the, what's this one popular thing that's been on the television? I couldn't stand to watch much of it. It was some kind of motorcycle gang. It was, what was that called?
I'm sorry.
But it's popularized.
Yeah.
It's popularized. People watch that violence of this motorcycle gang and all the stuff they were doing. They think that's the norm. That's the way they ought to act.
That wasn't the Hells Angels, was it?
Yeah.
About the Hells Angels?
No, well, yeah, the hell's that? But it was a TV show.
Oh.
What was it called? Oh, I can't think of it now. But you see all this crap.
I'm not a
young people exposed to it and say, hey, that's cool. I think I want to go do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 1989, gang warfare as a social conditioning to change was reintroduced in the streets of Los Angeles. Within a few short months of the first incidents, gangs began to proliferate, first in the scores and then in the hundreds. On the streets of the east side of Los Angeles, crack houses and rampant prostitution proliferated. Drug dealers dominated the streets. Anybody got in their way were killed. See, again, they're creating a problem, and then they're presenting a solution to it.
Yep, problem, reaction,
more
solution.
Police control.
Yep, problem, reaction, solution. And David Icke pointed this out, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Second phase of the gang war crisis was fragmentation. People not living in the areas frequented by gangs said, thank God they're not in our neighborhood. This ignored the fact that the crisis continued with or without recognition and that social order in Los Angeles had begun to break down. As profiled by Tavistock, these groups, not affected by gang war, broke away to defend themselves. So there started to be a fragmentation of society. Mm-hmm. And so the ones who were actually in the gang war areas, that was one thing, but those who were not was, basically saying, hey, thank God we're not like those people.
And that's
how had no compassion for the situation.
Right, and that's how the divide and conquer occurred, is how it happened.
Yeah. So, again, this whole gang thing was orchestrated by Tavistock. Let's get down here, about drug sales and this, that, and the other. Okay. An outstanding example of social conditioning to accept change, even when it is recognized as unwelcome change by the large population group in the sites of Stanford Research Institution, was the advent of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody loves the Beatles. Are you crazy? The Beatles were brought to the United States as a part of a social experiment which would subject large population groups to brainwashing of which they were not even aware. What was that one Beatles song called Revolution?
Right.
You ever listen to the words of that? Is that what we want? But yet, a whole generation of young people, the baby boomers were exposed to all that. In the 60s, that was a part of the culture. Man, if you didn't like the Beatles, you weren't cool. Now, among the hillbillies, rednecks, I mean, when I was a teenager, on the radio, they would have uh, a competition. And first they would play a Beatles song, and then they'd play an Elvis song, and they'd play, and then people would call in, and where I come from, everybody was voting for Elvis. They didn't like the Beatles, but other places it was different. Beatlemania.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, when the Tavistock brought the Beatles to the United States, nobody could have imagined the cultural disaster that was to follow in their wake. The Beatles were an integral part of the Aquarian conspiracy. Now, I know a lot of people listening to this are probably going to be mad at me for taking a shot at the Beatles. I don't care.
Yeah.
The phenomenon of the Beatles was not a spontaneous rebellion by youth against the old social system. Instead, it was a carefully crafted plot to introduce by a conspiratorial body which could not be identified. I mean, nobody knew about Committee 300 or Tavistock. Anyway, a highly destructive and divisive elements into a large population group targeted for change against its will. New words and new phrases prepared by Tavistock were introduced to America along with the Beatles. Words such as rock
Mm-hmm.
in relation to music sounds. The word teenager, that wasn't used before that.
Hmm.
Cool, discovered, pop music. See, these are all trigger words.
Yeah.
It says, incidentally, the word teenagers was never used until just before the Beatles arrived on the scene, courtesy of Tavistock and Institute for Human Relations. So they insert these words in here. Words have meaning. And so when you start to use the word, I mean, we now use that word all the time. Prior to that, that word was never used. It was a word that Tavistock made up to describe young people of a certain age category. See, everybody want to be a teenager. It's cool, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, as with the case of gang wars, nothing could or would have been accomplished without the cooperation of the media, especially the electronic media. And again, what was happening during these times? The media was being taken over to the point that it is now. That's one of the things that that Trump's lashing out against.
Even the musical atonal system, the Arnold Schoenberg,
Yeah, they changed
the
the
tonality.
vibration of the electronic music.
Not just that, but the tonal system,
Yeah.
it has a syntax to it. It has a dialogue
Uh-huh.
analysis. It's very much it very much patterns after the grammatical rules of our language.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the research I did, because I did psycholinguistics. That's what my background in music. So that was my
Great.
background. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was all the kinds of things that they did I mean, on every possible level, they really had this nefarious plan.
Yeah. Now, there's one other term I want to introduce here: future shock.
Hmm.
Future shock is described as a series of events which come so fast that the human brain cannot absorb the information. There's a one program on, it was called the Gilmore Girls. Did you ever see that program?
I'm not quite sure if I did.
Well, there's a mother and daughter scenario,
I don't watch
and they
TV.
talked so fast. I mean, it was just like a machine gun conversation going on all the time. And I watched that and said, I ain't watching that crap.
Yeah, there's some sitcoms that are like that, and I just,
Yeah,
if
just bang, 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 bang.
I'm at someone's house and I tend to see that, I have no interest in it. I don't watch
Yeah.
television anyway, so.
Okay, yeah. So future shock is described as a series of events which come so fast that the human brain cannot absorb the information. As I said earlier, science has shown that there are clearly marked limits to the amount of changes in the nature of them that the mind can deal with. After continuous shocks, the large targeted population group discovers that it does not want to make choices anymore. See?
He takes over.
Apathy takes over, often preceded by mindless violence, such as the characteristics of the Los Angeles street gang, serial killers, rapists, child kidnappers.
This is interesting because they're actually taking the complete spiritual element out of this. Actually like they're treating people like dogs, that this is really
Yeah,
exactly what's going to happen. And
behaviorism.
it's with a small percentage of people it will, but most people who are very spiritually grounded, people who are in touch with their spiritual soul center, they're not going to fall for this.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people. That's why their plans have unfolded, or have folded, I should say, not unfolded. Sorry, Amber Alert.
Okay.
That's an Amber Alert that came through just now.
Okay.
Let's see what that is.
All right. Now he gets into drug usage. He said drug usage now became an accepted part of everyday life in America. This Tavistock design program took in millions of American youth, and the older generation began to believe that America was undergoing a natural social revolution, failing all the while to realize that what was happening to their children was not a spontaneous movement, but a highly artificial creation designed to force changes in America's social and political life. Now, he has reference here to what we would call illegal drugs, but probably one of the biggest problems are legal drugs. How many people get hooked on painkillers?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And how many people are hooked on antidepressants and Valium and all that stuff? How many housewives are taking that crap on a regular basis? And the damned doctors are prescribing it to them, saying this will fix your problem. So they go into la land and they don't fix any problems at all. I mean, this is insidious. Now they're sticking drugs down the kids' mouth in school, the psychotropics and all this crap. I mean, marijuana, cocaine and heroin's one thing, but these other drugs that are being prescribed. Like I was talking to a lady one time, and she wasn't even a medical doctor. She was a nurse's assistant, and I think it was California where she was from. And as a nursing assistant, she was allowed to prescribe psychotropics.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
LPNs can, sure.
Yeah, that's
LPNs
what I'm
can
trying to tell
prescribe a
you.
lot of things. There's some things they can't prescribe, but they can prescribe a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, it's completely ludicrous. Anyway, so drugs, and then we'll wrap this up thing up because we have some other things we want to talk about.
Okay.
But talking about banks and drugs, but there was one little interesting historical thing here I wanted to point out that people hadn't considered. Let me see, get to it a little bit faster.
It's a lot for people who are listening to this or who may be just hearing it for the first time. This is a lot to take in. And,
it is.
The thing to do is we just need to reject this. That's what we need to do. We need to reject.
Just say no. Not only no, but hell no.
Yeah.
All right. Now, anybody's watched, old westerns and all that kind of stuff. You know about the, Chinese people that were imported to work on the railroads, and likely is being pointed out there was a reason for bringing the Chinese in, and why they couldn't use the African Americans to do this. Because the African Americans, who would come in and be brought in as slaves or whatever, didn't have access to opium. Who had the access to the opium? Chinese.
Yeah.
And so when they would bring in these Chinese coolies, as they call them, they were introducing opium into the United States. If you go back and study the opium wars in China and what the British had done to those people over there, so the East India Trading Company or whoever were trying to figure out how to get opium to become popular in the United States, and the way they introduced it was through the Chinese coolies that worked on the railroads, for crying out loud. This is historical. The British had set up a scam whereby Chinese coolies were sent to the U.S. as so-called indentured laborers. The rapacious Harriman family railroad needed coolies to push the railroad connection westward to the California coast, or so they said. Strangely enough, very few Negroes were given the manual labor jobs they were used to at that time, and could have done a better job than the emaciated opium addicts who arrived from China. The problem was that there was no market for opium among the Negroes, and moreover, Lord Inchcap, son of the founder of whatever it is, needed the coolies to smuggle in thousands of pounds of raw opium into North America. So they couldn't use the African Americans to do that. They used the Chinese coolies to introduce opium into the United States. This is all historical stuff, folks. But it gives you, pause to wonder. It says by 1846, some 120,000 coolies had already arrived in the United States to work on Harriman's railroad pushing westward. The pig trade, as they call it, was in full profitable swing. Because of this number is estimated by the United States government. 115,000 of these coolies that come in were opium addicts. Once the railroad was finished, the Chinese didn't go back to where they come from, but settled in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Vancouver, and Portland. They created a huge culture problem that has never ceased to exist. This is the introduction in the United States of opium.
The difference is what happened in Africa.
This is historical, but it's crazy. Right. Anyway, excuse me a minute here.
Well, what they tried to do in this next paragraph, they're talking about this attempt to do this with the Indian so-called coolies, and it did not have the same result, though. This was different.
Yeah. I'm getting excited again, so I'm starting to cough.
Getting all riled up, Winston. Getting Winston all riled up.
One more thing here, maybe we'll look at. Like I say, I'll send you this book and you can put it on, but okay. You can get right off the internet. Just type in Committee of 300, John Coleman, it'll pop right up. Okay, there's one thing here I wanted to refer to. Okay, this paragraph here, it says, it is virtually impossible to penetrate the Committee of 300 and the oligarchical families that go to make it up. The camouflage they pull over themselves as protective covering is very hard to rip off. This fact should be noted by every freedom-loving American. The Committee of 300 dictates what passes for United States foreign and domestic policies, and has done so for over 200 years. Right. Nowhere was this more strikingly portrayed than when cocky President Truman had the wind knocked out of him by Churchill, ramrodding the so-called Truman Doctrine down the throat of the little man from Independence, Missouri. So it's hard to deal with this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I said, back, when they were trying to recruit me. But luckily, I knew enough about it at that time. I said, no, I'm not getting in with you guys. Yeah. Because they were trying to recruit me because of, they'd been following me, I guess, with Solutions in Commerce, and they knew I knew stuff.
Yeah.
So they would have liked to have had me. But, I just said, no, I'm not getting involved with you. I'm not having anything. Because they wanted to do certain financial things, that I knew how to do. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting involved with you. So anyway, this is situation. There's a lot of information in this book, even though it was written, I don't know, like 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of good information here, so people can understand. And these are some of the things that we're trying to undo and correct, right now at this present time. So I thought it would be, kind of, another good book, that I've collected over the years, that might be helpful to people so they can understand what's going on with some of these things. And because, you can't resist something you don't know about. And again, this long range penetration concept, and maybe what we'll do, I had a kind of a hierarchy of things I want, but let's go right straight to Stockholm. Now, Stockholm syndrome is psychological response sometimes seen in abducted hostages. Okay, sometimes seen in abducted hostages, in which the hostage shows signs of loyalty to the hostage taker, regardless of the danger or risk in which they have been placed. The syndrome is named after Normalstorg robbery of someplace in Stockholm, in which bank robbers held bank employees hostage from August 23rd to August 28th, 1973. In this case, the victims became emotionally attached to their captors and even defended them after they were freed from their 6-day ordeal. The term Stockholm Syndrome was coined by the criminologist and psychiatrist Niels B. Bejer, however you say it, who assisted the police during the robbery and referred to this syndrome in a news broadcast. Now, don't this seem, completely irrational?
Yeah.
It would seem that, but apparently it's a part of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, now they give the case of like this bank robbery, and then you remember the Patty Hearst thing,
right?
That happened, during those times and whatnot. But I think I can make a pretty good case that our whole country suffers from Stockholm syndrome. Because we had the Kennedy assassination, then we had a murderer known as Lyndon B. Johnson became president, then we had all these others come in, and the American people were being held captive by their politicians, and are right now. Anyway, being held captive by their politicians, so they start to sympathize with those who are holding them captive. It's called Stockholm syndrome. And we see it on a constant basis, not just on, small things, but, on very,
Well, let me just say, sometimes, although it might not be the right approach to take, if these people are robbing banks because of this oppression and fascism by these oligarchs' agenda, and these people just, this is not right. I am no way condoning
no.
crime by any means, but I'm trying to figure out how these people could become emotionally attached and even defend them. And it could be because maybe they saw the perspective from from another perspective. They saw the situation from another perspective, from the perspective of, the downtrodden bank robbers, or whatever it was,
Yeah.
that they were tired of being pushed around in society, that they were tired of, and maybe they thought they could, help by, bringing more attention to the cause. I think that if there was a real injustice that drove these bank robbers to do what they're doing, and I'm sure there was, unless it was a psyop, then you can understand why people would then say, okay, I mean, you don't want to be killed for it, but
Well, the famous story. It's kind of funny. I'll tell a funny story
okay.
about the same thing. It's the occasion when Jesse James was robbing a train. You remember that story?
Okay.
Anyway, old Jesse gets on the train, and he pulls his guns out, and he tells all the people on the train, he said, "I'm Jesse James." He said, "I'm here to rob all the women, rob all the men and kiss all the women." And some fellow jumped up and said, "Well," he says, "you might be taking my money." He says, "but you'll not be kissing my wife." His wife grabbed his coattail and pulled him back down and said, "Shut up and let Jesse rob this here train." she wanted to kiss Jesse James.
Oh my God, that's so
Well,
funny.
that's kind of just a
The
funny
legend.
story about Stockholm.
Yeah.
Hey, you shut up and let Jesse rob this here train.
It's funny.
Yeah, a little funny story.
Yeah.
Anyway, says one theory to explain Stockholm is a cognitive dissonance. Specifically, people don't like being unhappy for long periods of time. But when people are kidnapped for a long period of time, they will be unhappy for that time unless they come to love their captors. Thus, to resolve the cognitive dissonance, the victim may begin to identify with the captors. So, that's one psychological reason how that would happen.
Right, but maybe I do disagree a little bit. We have to be careful who's putting this research out. And it might
Yeah,
be to steer
yeah.
our
Mm-hmm.
understanding to steer us into becoming into having Stockholm syndrome. Because I would tend to think that that there is once you realize that your life's not in danger, then in terms of cognitive dissonance, I think it's just a matter of if you're a hostage for a long period of time, you're going to see their perspective, whether you want to or not. So it might not really be cognitive dissonance as much as it is, suddenly being shocked into a situation where you really were apathetic about it before. Right? This is the people who, well, I'm glad it's not happening in my neighborhood. Maybe it's these people who refused to look at what was happening in the inner cities, refused to see the degradation of, the culture and society in those inner cities. And now they're confronted with it, which is why if you turn your cheek and look the other way, it's going to come to your back door eventually. This is
Good.
this is what I'm saying. Like, these are the kind of people who were held hostage. They didn't take the poor and hold them hostage, did they? No,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't. Tell me one poor person that was held hostage. Show me a homeless
Yeah.
man. Show me a homeless man that was held hostage. So I'm thinking that this is more kind of like um, this Stockholm syndrome. I think there's more to it. As a researcher, I'm just saying that I'm not buying this completely. I think
Yeah.
I think this might be a psyop also. So
It could be.
I'm thinking there's other reasons, that there's reasons why this is happening. They're not just, you know, suddenly taking on the emotional, attachment to these people. It's like they're starting to see a part of society that they never wanted to see before, and they're confronted with it whether they want to or not. And they are starting to see that there's something that's now affecting them, that they turned in their cheek and looked the other way, and now they're in the middle of it, and they can start to see the anger and the angst and the frustration of this class of people from a different perspective. I think that's a better explanation, and I'd like to hear the viewers' comments on that. But sorry, Winston, I'm a researcher, so once you get going on the psych stuff, you know better that I'm
Oh
going to
yeah.
be weighing in
No.
my 2 cents, because I do have experience with this and knowledge on it. So.
Well, I would think too that people who are taken captive are very adaptive because they're adapting so they can survive a
True.
perceived threat.
True.
And so, I mean, there may be a
I think there's
variety of
stages.
explanations.
I think there's stages of captivity. And I think
Mhm.
there's going to be different psychological processes a person's going to go through at different stages of the captivity. Because initially you're concerned you're always going to be concerned about your life. And I think initially that's the first thing you're going to be concerned about. As time goes on and they feed you and they are still, let's say 60 days goes past, you've gotten to know these people and maybe you've gotten to understand their plight. So although you don't condone what they're doing, you understand from their perspective, they're trying to make a statement. They're trying to make, maybe the wrong way. Well, of course, the wrong way, but it's an overall cry for help is what it is. And a cry that was ignored even by these people before. So, and I think as time goes on, they're not as worried about their life, because it wasn't, that initial threat of their life, they've survived. So the initial threat of their life being taken has is subsided to some degree, but it's not gone completely. So I think it goes through stages in the psychological. And I think if I were to conduct the study, I would get very different results. But go ahead.
Well, I'll mention two things in passing that might apply to this situation.
Sure.
People can think about it. Number one is the institutionalization of prisoners.
Right.
People who have been in prison, right or for right or wrong reasons,
Hmm.
will become institutionalized, and many of them, once they get it, have been in prison for a very long time,
Right.
simply cannot function. Once they come out, they become institutionalized.
Right.
For instance, that there's a real good movie about that. What was it called? The Shawshank Redemption.
Right.
That's an interesting movie to watch because you see some of these things playing out about institutionalization, how some handle it and how others handle it differently. So that was interesting. But a classic is uh, uh, Robinson Crusoe. You know that story. They were, the family was put onto a desert island, and so they had to adapt in order to survive. And
Right.
so that's not the way they had previously lived. But once they were shipwrecked, they had to adapt. And so perhaps some of these people who get into hopeless situations, as it appears,
Right.
will simply adapt for survival.
Sure.
So there's, like I say, it's an interesting study.
Sure.
A lot of different things.
Sure.
Anyway, another explanation here says captive who exhibit the symptom tend to sympathize with, think highly of their captors, at time believing that the captors are showing them favors stemming from inherent kindness. And so again, go watch that Shawshank Redemption movie.
Right.
You know, it's a good show. I mean, I've seen it several times, but you see some of these very concepts being played out.
Right.
The main character, he's slow playing it because he gives the appearance of compliance in the back of his mind. He fixing to put the screws to these people, and he did. But the other character, played by Morgan Freeman, who had been institutionalized, finally he got out of prison and he didn't know how to function, and so finally he looked up this other guy, and so it's quite an interesting movie. I think people would enjoy looking at that from this point of
Sure.
view. And then the other famous movie on this thing, The Cool Hand Luke. What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Again, I think there's stages of captivity, and I think there's
Yeah,
different adapt. There's different,
yeah.
there's different. I mean, I'm talking about the psychological process. I'm not always talking about the adaptation mechanisms, um, but that may be separate than their emotional attachments. That might be a part of a survival mechanism. I don't
Uh-huh.
know. But I think I would like to do the study myself. And, with all studies, the reliability of them is all in the reproducibility of them. If you can reproduce a study with the same, but in today's day and age, we just can't hold people, you know, uh, hostage and test and see what's going to happen. So
But you want to volunteer at Stanford?
yeah, I know, right? So
Who'd be
now we,
needing enough to volunteer for that crap? How much do they pay them kids for that crap?
I don't know if I don't remember them getting paid. They could have, but I don't remember. But they sealed off an area of one of the basements of the buildings there, and in after 2 weeks, it had that strong of a psychological
Yeah,
impact. They had to go through counseling. I mean, it
yeah.
really affected these kids.
Anyway, this article here goes through some other uh, uh, examples, of
Okay.
this thing with, Patty Hearst and some of these
Yeah.
different ones and situations. So it's a real good article, for people who want to study it. Oops, there it goes again. Can you believe this crazy?
Well, in
I hate
today's
this.
day and age, the Patty Hearst that you see are MK Ultra, and be through this frequency manipulation that you're talking about. This that they were mentioning earlier. The what was it called? If I tried to write it down. Uh, well, you're saying the long range penetration, these frequencies,
Yeah.
that's what they do today, MK Ultra. That's what these aren't random kids. No, are you kidding me? Are you telling me that the condom snorting, Tide Pod eating kids are the ones going in there? Are you kidding me? I mean, did parents not know their kids are doing these things, eating Tide Pods and snorting condoms? I mean, it's like, and they're the ones that want gun control. Like, you don't think there's something wrong with that? Okay, it's like people. This is our society's like upside down. We got to change it. We got to change this.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll send this article to you, and people can study through it,
Yeah,
and
that'd be
become
great.
familiar with it,
Mm-hmm.
and see, what you should do when you read this information in your mind. You should be thinking, okay, how do I relate to this information?
Mm-hmm.
Is this happening to me? Has it happened to me?
Right.
How would I resist? How would I keep my sanity if I were put into a situation like this?
Right.
Knowing full well that you're in a situation like this, the people are being held captive. Now, for I wrote an article a while back. It's called "The Tyranny of Gold,"
Mm-hmm.
and this has been the big thing about substance gold-backed currencies. And and the gist of the article was what I call the tyranny of gold, and that is, why do we rely upon gold? And that's why one of those interviews we did a couple times back, I suggested people learn how to just trade with each other, because that's the way they do it out in the stars and everything. They just trade. They don't use money. They're not tyrannized by gold. And and so everybody's, like I say, everything is not as it appears.
Right.
Everything is not as it appears. And so okay, where's the gold coming from?
Hmm.
I give the information that 200 billion of gold that comes from the elders to the uh, uh, interim government. Really,
Hmm.
are we somehow obligated now for that gold?
Hmm.
And so, are we just going to exchange one tyranny for another tyranny? That was my point.
Right. That seems
And so,
simple.
if we're going to be a free people, how about we go out and and go across the countryside and dig up some more gold and send that 200 billion of gold back to the elders and use our own gold?
Hmm.
I mean, that's how I would have solved the problem. Now, it might take a little while, but there's gold all over the place. People don't realize that.
Right.
Hell, there's more gold in seawater than you can imagine.
I think there's the same kind of misconception about diamonds. They're not that rare.
Oh, geez, that's
They're so abundant that,
that's the
it's
most abundant gem on the planet.
yeah, and they are doing it, saying it's rare because, they're trying to make as much money off of us. So what we have to do, we're all being held hostage. I mean, that's really what we're saying. It's kind of really, I mean, the conclusion we draw from this is that we're all being held hostage. We're all
Yeah,
hostages. And this is how do hostages really behave? And is it that we all have Stockholm Syndrome? But it's different when you don't know you're a hostage.
yeah, that's true.
That's what it's totally different if you don't know you're a hostage and you don't know who your captors truly are, because that's what it repeated in this document that you just shared with us. It repeatedly, these punctuations, these bursts of unrest in society from gangs and whatever, they couldn't, it had this deleterious effect because they couldn't identify the real source of it. So that was, what's always been the advantage to the Committee of 300 is their secrecy. But
Yep.
now, but it's well out in the open at this point. Yes.
Well, it's not well out in the open, but we're getting more exposure to it. I
Well,
put it that way.
if you can just Google
Yeah.
this on the internet, then to me
Oh
it's
yeah.
well out in the open. But
Yeah.
that's just an opinion.
Yeah. Here's another article I'll send to you that people
Okay.
might be interested in. It's kind of an old article about brainwashing and mind control techniques. There was some interesting points in here. Repetitive music, most likely with the beat close to the human heart.
Right.
Most likely used during study sessions, as the teacher will say, the music helps you to relax and concentrate. A lot of people, I see them walking around with earbuds all the time, and they're constantly listening to music. I keep thinking, why? Why do people keep listening to this? I mean, even when I travel,
Hmm.
I mean, I won't. I mean, just
Well,
seldom will I turn on music and listen to it.
well, that's why the 4/4
First off,
beat.
it's all electronic, and I don't like electronic music.
Hmm. The 4/4 beat time is the closest to the human
Yeah.
And that is the human heartbeat, and that is the most popular time signature for most modern, for pop music and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then here's another concept called voice roll.
Hmm.
The voice roll is pattern, pace, style used by hypnotists when inducing a trance. It is also used by many lawyers, several of whom are highly trained hypnotists when they desire to entrench a point firmly in the minds of the jurors. Go sit at the courthouse sometimes and listen to them. They practice these techniques.
Mm.
I mean, if you watch some of the popular TV shows, you'll see the attorneys preparing for a big case, and they're standing in front of the mirror presenting themselves.
Hmm.
They're practicing hypnosis. And this, we'll probably get to it here in a minute, but many of the preachers do this.
Oh,
Did you ever listen to, Billy Graham, or what was that one crazy guy down there?
Joel Osteen.
No, well, yeah, all of them doing the same thing. It's called the preacher's role,
Mm.
and they're doing this. They're hypnotizing people. What they try to do is induce alpha state.
Hmm.
See, most people who are awake is what's called the beta state of full awareness. In other words, you know everything that's going on around you.
Hmm.
But if you can be put into an alpha state, which is right next to going to sleep, they found out that people will respond to suggestion
Hmm.
25 times more than they is a multiple of 25 times of what they would respond to in beta state. So
Right.
the idea is to get people into alpha state.
There's some
I've
people,
watched this. I've seen
yeah.
it. I mean, it happens all the time.
And there's some people, some other ways they induce this is by speaking so low and doing it that you
Yes,
have
my
to,
dear brothers and
they
sisters,
draw
what
you
we
in.
need to do is
Yeah.
come to love one another. On and on it goes.
Well, there's some people who talk at such a low level that you have to really focus and listen
Yeah.
intently in order to hear what they're saying. And so you're much more attentive to that, and you're much more able to remember that if your attention, if the more attention you put on it, the more likely you're going to
Well,
remember.
yeah, you see, if you watch television, the purpose of television is to create alpha state in the people who are watching. So you're watching the program, you're interested in it, and so you go into an alpha state, and then just for the fun of it, if you have a meter, they can measure the decibels
Hmm.
coming from the television.
Hmm.
All right, so you're watching the program, and it's at a certain sound level, and then to go to commercials, sound level goes up. So you're in alpha state, which is puts you into a situation where you're 25 times more susceptible to suggestion. So you're in the alpha state, and then all of a sudden the commercial comes in. Watch the decibel rate go up. The commercials are louder than the program. Why do you think that is? See, it's all psychological technique. Uh, then room feel. I mean, this is just a darn good article here that you can start to recognize when someone is trying to control you. So, like I say, this is a pretty old article, but the
Yeah,
concepts are still all there. So, like I say, I'm
brainwash.
just trying to provide information to people so they can start to, be a little bit more aware.
Right.
And then there was one more that I wanted to screen share. Uh, let's see, it was 10.
This is the Great Awakening, Winston. This is totally appropriate. It's completely appropriate information. Go
Yeah, I think this one here was the one uh, that they were talking about using electronics.
for it.
If this is the same one I'm thinking about, it was I think I think this fellow that wrote this is a professional
Wow.
in this. And
Persuasion.
what had happened was he was working for a company that actually created electronic mind control. In other words, they would beam
Mm.
thoughts, at people to get them to respond and act a certain way. And then he went to another seminar from a
Uh-huh.
different company who were using the same technologies. And even though he knew they were doing it, he said he could not resist it, even though he knew they were doing it.
Mm.
And now, I mean, this is in the commercial world.
Mm-hmm.
This is not CIA. This is not Black Ops. This ain't none of that stuff. This
So
stuff is happening right out here in your local supermarket.
in your supermarket, in any commercial store you walk into, exactly.
Yeah.
This is what they're
Listen to the
doing.
music they're playing. What are
It's
they doing to
horrible
you?
music, man. I can't stand it. It's usually annoying, and I can't wait to get the heck out of there. But
Well, that's what I'm saying.
yeah.
But look how many women they'll say, "Well, we're not going to buy anything. We just want to go shopping." Why?
Mm.
It's a pleasant experience. They go into a department store. They go here. They go there, and they just look through the clothes and all that kind of stuff. You know, they may or may not buy anything, but they like to shop.
Mm.
What? Why? I mean, you know, if I want to go get something, that's my wife all the time, criticizing me and say, well, let's go shopping. I say, I ain't going shopping.
Mm.
If I want something, I'll go and get it and
Right.
then I'll come home. But I'm not going to go and look through all the stuff.
Yeah.
I don't care to.
Oh yeah, I never do that. Such a waste of
Uh,
time.
if I decide I want something like a pair of pants or shoes or whatever, I go and get it and I come home.
Right.
You know, I don't go from shop to shop to shop to shop to look at all the stuff. You know, but again, you know, why do people? And I'm not just saying women, but men do the same thing. I mean, some of the rednecks like to go to Bass Pro, look at the boats, look at the fishing gear, look at the tackle, look at the guns and all that kind of stuff. You know, why do they do that? Do they not know what they want? Or do they just like to go and have the experience? There's something, listen, folks, there's something going on. And so this article here, I think, would, kind of indicate some of that. So it's a pretty good article. I'll send it to you, and that way,
Okay, great.
you can put it with it and people can read about it.
Post.
But it goes on all the time.
It sure does, and we're all being subjected to it, and we really need to wake up and, think for ourselves.
Okay, now that we've talked about all this, let's go back and watch this again. And try to pick out some of the things we've talked about. Oh, danger, it's emergency, something's going to happen. Oh dear, what are we going to do? Let's rush right out here. We got to, oh, and then the pretty lady comes out and she's really concerned. Oh dear, oh my goodness, oh
Oh no,
dear.
it's going to be a tragedy.
Yeah, it's going to be a tragedy. What are we going to do about this? Oh dear, disaster. Oh, whew, thank
She's going to
God.
be devastated if he
Oh, thank God.
dies, right?
We're so relieved. Look, he climbs out.
Yeah.
Oh my, now we're all so happy about it. Oh dear, what a relief. And then the idiot stands on the wing of the plane and the whole thing falls over the side. Oh no, brother, I can't believe that happened. And
Yeah,
so the pretty lady runs out, and there he is. He's safe after all
she
and smoking a
was.
Lucky Strike. Now, doesn't that just make you want to go out and smoke Lucky Strikes?
No, not at all.
Did you see all the things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. All the parts were there, and the ladies, all got her lipstick all nice and fresh,
Oh
and
yeah.
pretty, and the damsel all of a sudden is,
Well, it's kind of just a funny little clip and stuff like it. But look at all the things that was in that.
yeah.
That was done by psychologists. That
Well,
whole commercial was created by psychologists,
well, I
and
can
they did a
remember.
darn good job of it. I mean, after watching that, I want to smoke Lucky Strikes,
Well,
and I don't smoke.
the advertising industry looks for people with psychology backgrounds because they
Oh yeah.
know, yeah,
Oh
that
yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
can
Yeah.
manipulate. It's about manipulation of
It
people to
is.
sell products.
And like I say, when I went to school, I mean, that's what I learned. I learned behaviorism. And that's why I was training that chicken in that Skinner box
Yeah,
as a as a practical demonstration of how it really works.
right.
And people who are unthinking and unknowledgeable about these techniques
Right.
may in fact become victims, of the very
Right.
thing, that we're talking about here.
But you
So
know what?
again, we're trying to get people to the point where you have a little bit of knowledge about some of these things so that you won't be victimized.
Well, I think the most important thing that your Skinner box demonstrated was that you couldn't just teach the chicken to dance. You had to
No.
do this incrementally. So you had to start them out with just responding to getting
Hmm.
a piece of food, and
It took a
that you
long
had to
time.
you had to train them on that for a while. And this is how they train us, through incrementalism. And
Yeah.
this is actually theory in public policy. It's called
Yeah.
incrementalism. And
Uh-huh.
this is how change happens. And they're oh, I have to tell you, I mean, I was in public policy class, and this is exactly what they were teaching. They're teaching you how to become a policymaker or to be in the policy area, and they're teaching you that, so they already learned from all this research how to do it, and they're teaching you this is the theory. They call it a theory, incremental. We do change incrementally. We
Yeah.
don't do them, and that came from the Fabian Society
Yeah.
rather,
Hmm.
back in England. And this is where it all comes from, which has their logo, the wolf in sheep's clothing, things
Oh
like
yeah.
that. So folks, the symbology is there, all of these things. This is a great topic today, Winston. I'm really glad you brought this up. Thank you for sharing with everybody as we reflect on this Memorial Day weekend, and we think about all those who came before us, and and I'm kind of glad you used that as an example, because it is Memorial Day weekend, and we want to thank everyone. It's Fleet Week in the harbor of New York City. We know that POTUS flew over there yesterday or the day before, and took photos and looked at all
Yeah.
the new ships coming in to celebrate Fleet Week. It's always a big deal in the New York harbor, and to remember all those who served, and let's not forget that they didn't die in vain. For those who sacrificed their lives, and for those who still live on with a wounded or impaired quality of life, let's not let their sacrifices be in vain. Let's wake up and at least let them see that they fought for something worth fighting for, not a bunch of sheep.
Yeah. Well, we had, there's one thing I might mention a lot of people not aware of, and that is, even though I spent that time in the Marine Corps, and I was never in combat, but I was in combat during what's called the Cold War, and that was we were in a race to get ahead of the Russians and everybody with nuclear development and stuff. So yeah, I mean that was a real war, and that's where all my injuries come from. My injuries didn't come from Vietnam; they come from the Cold War.
Whoa.
So a lot of us are kind of busted up over that, but people don't think about that. But we were involved in Cold War, and we were Cold Warriors. So anyway,
All right,
just
folks.
another little thought. She got on her glasses
I
now.
got the Patriot glasses on, and we are, this is a Q holiday, folks. So let's our Q Patriot glasses. Show your Q patriotism this weekend for Memorial Day. Post your videos and your comments, and just want to shout out to everybody who served, and with a great big thank you and appreciation, and of course to you too as well, Winston. And
Yeah,
to my other co-hosts, the Fets, who I'll see on Tuesday to do our POTUS report, and all those who have served one way or another. Thank you for your service and your sacrifices. So, and we're big patriots on the GoldFish report. So we're
yeah.
always going to be grateful and thankful
Well,
for
we've had a
all
good
that.
discussion today. This is right up your alley. I mean, a lot of times I'll get on here and carry it, but because you're so well experienced in these areas, you have a lot to contribute with these kind of discussions. So I appreciate the input you put in.
Well, thank you, Winston. Thanks. And I can't help it. There's times when I don't want to take up too much time because I know you have, a certain number of things you want to get to. Sometimes we don't get to them. But, when there's something that I do have firsthand knowledge of that I
Yeah,
think can contribute to the conversation, I do contribute in that manner. And you know that we did, as you referenced in the very beginning, we also have that article published on, let's see, I'm pretty sure we have it published, the Aquarius group briefing,
yeah.
which does explain all this electromagnetic manipulation
Uh-huh.
and targeting of people through their unique frequency, which is like a thumbprint that everyone has. So that I think is on the goldfishreport.com. And folks, you can always go to the goldfishreport.com and find the links to all of our reports. If you want to go on YouTube, there you have to access the POTUS reports from the website, from our website. The rest of the reports are published. They just ban all of Fetzer's reports, so they don't let us upload anything with Jim Fetzer. Uh, that's public, but we do have it unlisted, so then you just have to access it through there. But if you go on our BitChute page, everything is there, so nothing is censored. And we are still in the process of uploading our archives, so please bear with us, and we will keep getting your favorite Goldfish reports up there as soon as we can. So Winston, thank you so much. I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. Do you have a barbecue plans or get together or anything?
Oh, I don't know about that so much. Uh, my significant other will be here tomorrow, back from her pilgrimage, so
Whoa.
we'll spend some time planning, an interview, so that because she has a lot of good things to say about that might, that might people would be interested in.
Well, you know what, Winston, after kind of reports like this, it's really great to have something uplifting and something very,
Yeah, really,
something very personal, something that you can do for yourself that nobody can manipulate and take away from you. And there's nothing,
exactly.
it seems so rewarding. I can't really do it. I have a very bad ankle, had some reconstructive surgery twice on it, so I can't
Yeah,
really do a lot of long-term walking like I used to. I used to be a runner, so that's over. But it's still a process that I think is tremendously personal to each person, and it's very rewarding and something that offers an opportunity for growth, for
yeah.
personal
We'll
growth.
put that together as quickly as possible,
Excellent.
because I believe that our listening audience here would be greatly benefited by this information.
True.
Uh, and so, I mean, if you can't go and do it, you can kind of live through it with others and
Hmm.
have that experience, as they share what happens to them and stuff. So, she does have a great deal of experience with this, having, been through Spain a couple of times and been through New Mexico. And one of the things that they had planned that they weren't able to accomplish was they were putting together a pilgrimage for handicap.
Right.
And what they were going to do was use the old toll road for the Erie Canal. And that's, I mean, it's handicapped accessible, in other words.
Right.
And so people in wheelchairs or different things, but
Right.
they just couldn't get the logistics worked out, because what pilgrims do is they stay, you know different places, like in a church or wherever,
Mm.
to overnight, because you can only make so many miles per day, and so they have to stay someplace at night. That's part of the pilgrimage experience. But with the handicap thing that they were trying to accomplish, they simply could not accommodate handicapped along the way.
Right.
So that's still a thought process. So when you talk about, could I go on a pilgrimage, as a handicapped person, they're working on it. So that everybody could have that kind of experience if they wanted to try it out.
Yeah. That's
So
wonderful.
anyway, there's a lot of good points to this, and I think people will be really impressed, with the whole concept. So we'll put it together as quickly as we can,
Great. That would be wonderful.
so that people can have that.
I think people
Yeah.
will really enjoy that. And
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear something a little bit different. So that's great. Well, Winston, have a great weekend. I hope you have a nice time, and I'm sure it'll be good to have her back and hear all about all of her journey, her long journey. And folks, to everyone, have a wonderful Memorial Day. It's going to be hot in the Northeast, and it's going to be good weather for picnicking all weekend. So I hope you all enjoy yourselves, have a great time, and we'll be back. You'll see us back on Tuesday for our POTUS report. So enjoy this holiday and don't forget to thank a vet. And with that, have a great weekend, Winston. We'll see you next week for another edition of Country Roads. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.
Okay, everybody, goodbye and Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.